Hello, good morning. Today, March 7, 2022, I am very pleased to welcome you to our third installment of the Brooklyn Jewish History Project series of introductory workshop to Jewish genealogy presented by the Center for Jewish History Genealogy Librarian, J.D. Arden. I am Ariane Loeb, Outreach Archivist in charge of the Brooklyn Jewish History Project. Over the last few years, our collection has grown significantly as we've gathered hundreds of documents, interviews, and memorabilia about Jewish Brooklyn that reflects Brooklynites' commitment to preserve their history and lives. The visibility of these histories and the ever-increasing online access to new archival documents and images, more every year, has driven a new interest in genealogy research and techniques. J.D. Arden will teach you during this workshop the fundamentals of genealogy research. Your questions and answers will be managed by our Center for Brooklyn History's Special Collections cataloger, Deborah Tint. Please, hi Deborah, please write your question for JD in the chat. I would like to thank the Bird Foundation for their generous support and Natiba Guy Clement and Deborah Tint for their help putting this workshop together. JD, it's now your turn.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. Happy Monday. So since we're a relatively small group today, I am keeping my one eye on the chat. Deborah is being very helpful managing. Hopefully it won't get too overwhelming with too many questions and I'll get to everybody. But since we're a small group, I'll say I don't mind if, as I go through the presentation, anyone wants to unmute and chime in with a question so that they don't forget. That's fine with me. So let me begin briefly to introduce the institution I work for, a Center for Jewish History that's always happy to collaborate with Center for Brooklyn History and BPL, Brooklyn Public Library in general. We're great friends. Our building is on 16th Street in Manhattan between 5th and 6th Avenues. We are open, gallery exhibits are open for walk-ins anytime with proof of vaccination and mask. And the library reading room is open 3 days a week by appointment. So we are up and running and welcome people back who want to explore Jewish history in general. And we refer and collaborate also with Center for Brooklyn History if your questions are Brooklyn specific. So let me start. What I'd like to do today is guide you through some basic information about doing Jewish genealogy, how you can start your family history research from home, or how you can expand your family history research if you already have started. So just to think a little bit about what we mean when talking about genealogy, those times when life events intersect with some sort of traceable document production or family stories. Also, what we're good at in the libraries is to help you put into context the social history. So if you want to research what did those towns or streets look like, or what articles were in the newspapers at the time your ancestors or the people you're researching were living, that's a great research adventure to go on, and we're glad to help you. And nowadays, especially since we're all adept at Zoom, it's a good time to make Zoom dates with relatives and people who know the family history. You can set the Zoom to record, and there you have a very easy oral history recording of family history, and you can save it, review it, send it to other family members. Um, and while you're at it, if you're starting, find out who in the family has that old shoebox of documents and photos, and you can set to digitizing the old documents and photos to preserve them, and also enhance your family history research with the memorabilia. Um, and I always get the question, so I'll mention briefly, and ask me, anyone, if you have a more specific idea. Um, there are easy ways online now, especially if you do Facebook, to join a group. One is called Tracing the Tribe, Jewish Genealogy. Another one is called Genealogical Translations. Those are both free. You just click to join the Facebook group, and you can upload photos with inscriptions or old letters, postcards, documents in a language that you need some help with. Gravestones also with Hebrew inscription, and among other ways, there's also a forum on a website, JewishGen, that I can mention later. But nowadays, with the internet, you can get free and very useful translation. So that's one thing. If you're really starting out, I can give some suggestions about family tree software. You could use a printable family tree chart like we have on our website that I mentioned there, or you could use a software like Chronoplex is one software that's free to use. Gramps is another family tree building software. So there are some commercial and free family tree building options out there if you're just starting out. This an example, a printable or typable family tree chart. And I'd also like to mention, if you wanted to get to that, genealogy.cjh.org. If you are, since we're celebrating Brooklyn, the borough of Delis and Shuls, I can't share any Delhi, unfortunately, but I can share some news about Shuls. On our website, genealogy.cjh.org, under the Resources tab, NYC Synagogue Map is an electronic resource we've been working on that allows you to scroll around Manhattan and Brooklyn and click on a former synagogue location, and then you can read about the history, when it was organized, what other community organizations it may have been associated with, especially immigrant aid societies. Częstochow is a pretty well-known town in Poland, so that synagogue can give you some clues that most of the members would have been from that town of Częstochowa, for example. So this is a fun, interactive resource that we like to encourage, and we're working on it. I see the question pop up. There are no pictures yet, but we're working on incorporating more data so that eventually we could import. I think it would be interesting to see any historical photos and the present day photos. So a lot of these synagogues, either the building doesn't exist or it exists, but eventually it became a church or an apartment building, or was put to some other use. So, but it's a great way to explore our history. But in the meantime, it gives you the address, and you can Google Map. I think that's, for now, almost as good. You can see the address and just pop it into Google Map. So that I invite you to explore, and I'll continue in the presentation. Either in the public library or for now, still through many public library websites, you can access that well-known database, Ancestry.com. Otherwise, at home, you get 2 weeks free before they charge you for a subscription. But not everyone knows about this alternate site, FamilySearch.org. It functions pretty much like Ancestry. It's a good place to start if it's tricky for you to get into a public library computer or access with your library card from home, and you don't want to commit or you don't want to test the 2 weeks free. Start with FamilySearch.org. It's a good site anyway to use in addition to Ancestry. And that's a good way to start looking for birth, marriage, death, naturalizations. The hints that I'll tell you today that I hope are useful are, first of all, just keep it simple. Start with the first person who came to the US or the oldest person in the family you know about. Don't get discouraged. Um, don't feel overwhelmed trying to look for too many people at once, and just keep it first name, last name, where the person was living at the time you're looking for them, and an approximate year of birth. And the story I like to tell about approximate year of birth, in honor of my grandmother Evi, Zichronah Livracha. She was exactly the same age as my grandfather, but she didn't like that. She thought, especially in the 60s and 70s, that social pressure on women to be younger than the husband. So she just started lying about the age and putting different, making herself younger on the documents that she filled out. And interestingly, out of love, my grandfather also perpetuated that story. So when I started to get documents to do my grandmother's genealogy, she kept getting younger and younger the more documents I found. So, give some leeway for the spellings of names and the approximate ages, and that'll help you not get stuck and not miss any information that might be relevant. Another fun myth to dispel that can save you some time, at Ellis Island itself, there were no name changes. If someone changed their name in the last century, usually it was unofficial before or after immigration. But Ellis Island was too busy. They just checked people getting off the ship, checked them for any medical conditions, sent them out the door. They didn't produce any document that you'll find to figure out what the name was before immigration. But uh, you know, you'll look anyway before in the country before immigration, and save yourself some time. Spelling, also, I mentioned, today we think of very specific spellings that distinguish one family from the other. But remember, in earlier decades and centuries, people had a nickname or maybe double first names and sometimes used one or the other, especially in our Jewish culture history. So you never know also which of a double first name they would have chosen to Americanize. And spelling coming from Hebrew alphabet, Russian alphabet, Arabic alphabet, then you could have quite a few ways to spell the same name. So that we also encourage if you're starting out. And NYPL, BPL, if you check that you have your library card number and you can log in, then you can also access many of the free or card login databases. So if you're more advanced and you want some suggestions about other places you could look for information, think of, did the ancestor you're researching collect Social Security in the US? Then they have a Social Security application on file that has more information. Even if they didn't serve in the army, could they have been registered in a draft? That can be a source of information. Were they a member of any professional group, or did they get any sort of educational or professional certificate? These are all things we can help you look further beyond just census and ship arrival information. Another great hint that I hope is helpful to you, know that for the majority of American Jews, we have ancestors who came from what they identified as Russia. But in almost every case, this was the former Russian Empire. Relevant to current events, the Russian Empire expanded and occupied Baltic states, Ukraine, Poland. So in a shorthand identification, coming from Russia means that you'll have to figure out which of the smaller countries you see on the map was the actual place of before immigration. Same thing with Austria, referring to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That could have been a wide range of places, from Hungary to Ukraine, Poland. In most cases, it doesn't mean that they came from the country, the little country Austria today. And same story with Turkey, referring to the former Ottoman Empire. So that's a good starting hint. The records are usually there in the archives of that country. They stay in the place where they were produced. So even after the Holocaust, if there is no Jewish population, the civil records that were produced in a state archive should still be there, and we can help you search, find ways to search those local state archives. So if you're, yes, question.
This is phenomenal so far. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This kind of brings to light an issue I've run into sort of with researching my past genealogy, which is like you said, a lot of family members who just come from Russia.
Yeah.
And I've actually found on websites like Ancestry, oh, the towns that they were from, or location, cities, whatever it may be. But when I go look up those cities, a lot of them don't seem to exist. There are some with maybe similar sounding names in areas like Ukraine, but it's kind of, that's an issue I've run into where it seems like a lot of these places, maybe the names have changed of the areas or things like that.
Sure. Yeah, this is Zach, right?
Yes.
Okay, you have perfect, impeccable timing
Oh,
with
amazing.
your question because that's exactly what is here on this next slide. My grandfather, for example, when I found his application for citizenship, and in our family stories, my mom had always just sort of said, "Oh, my father came from Latvia, he came from Riga." I don't know, maybe he said Riga because that is the capital of Latvia, or maybe that's where they got on the ship. But I found handwritten on his application this little town Lutzin, Lutsin, as his birthplace. It doesn't exist on any map today, but this database, JewishGen.org, the town finder or community database, is really the best place to go. You type in the name of the town as you know it, and you can see at the bottom of the slide, it's searching for all of the language group names of the towns.
That's great.
Yeah, so and you can see Ludza in present day Latvian. It's different enough that I probably would not have recognized it as the same town without that databases. And in some cases, the name can be very different. So Zach, I would recommend start with that JewishGen town finder. And there are some tricks you can use, like if you put in, you definitely use the option that you can see there at the bottom of the search panel, phonetically like. Keep the search phonetic. If you still don't find anything that seems close, there's a trick. Instead of phonetically like, you can select starts with. And as long as you put in at least 3 letters, you could search for any town names or town name variations that start with or contain a combination of a few letters. So it should work. That database includes any town that had a Jewish community of at least 100 people. So you could still run into you still may not find a town in the community database if there was no Jewish community at any time larger than 100 people. But then JewishGen gives you the option to search the general gazetteer as well. So, but yeah, you have a follow-up question?
No follow-up question. Just thank you for this. This is awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you. So figuring you could, when you locate your ancestors' application for citizenship, that could be a source of birth town. When other ways, sometimes by mistake on the census or ship manifest, the clerk may have written the town, even though it wasn't required, or when people identified their closest living relative. Often, if they didn't have family here, then they would have identified a relative back in their birth town. And a final clue, if you're still struggling to identify the town, if you can locate the graves or cemetery records on a site like Find a Grave or Billion Graves, or you know where the grave is, go to the cemetery. Maybe the cemetery office has a map of which sections were bought by different immigrant aid society groups, the Landsmannschaften, or there may be an inscription a gate or an archway in front of that section of the cemetery that identifies it as the Częstochower Benevolent Society section, for example. And then you get a very strong clue that probably, your ancestor buried in that section has some connection to that town. So those are some other ways. Also, what JewishGen is most used for, of course, are the records. So once you identify the country from that list, by the present day countries, and it's actually, since I made this slide not too long ago, they've expanded the list. They're always adding, and you can see there's some overlap between Ashkenazi identified or Sephardi Mizrachi. Israel is in there, Syria is in there. On this site, there's a companion site. I might as well show, called SephardicGen.org, which also has some overlap between, focuses more on Sephardi Mizrachi, but also has some overlap. You can see South America, Great Britain is in there, Italy, so Netherlands, Portugal. So because the Mediterranean basin really is so small, if Syrian refugees can walk to Germany in a few months, and these days, unfortunately, Ukrainian now refugees are also, showing, what a small world we have, then definitely if there's any overlap, if you have ancestors who went from, one side of the Mediterranean to the other, from southern to northern Europe, then keep in mind that you can use both of those, JewishGen or SephardicGen. This is what a typical record looks like. You'll always see the name of the individual. Usually you'll see their parents' names, usually including maiden name. And depending on how much information was included, you may get even grandparents' names, profession, where the person was officially registered. Nowadays, many of the Polish records that came from the JRI website are linked to the original record in the Polish archive. So, and this, by the way, is free. JewishGen, you just sign up with an email. It may be confusing in that sometimes if you try to search for two things at once, you'll get a message that you can do that if you donate $100. You don't need to. I think the free version works fine. So you can, once you know the country you're looking for the records in, or if you have a very specific name and you want to try a few countries, you can start right away on JewishGen. And this is what the translated, transcribed, typical record looks like. There are a lot of other tools. I won't waste too much time, but I'll just mention briefly. ViewMate. If you click into ViewMate on JewishGen, you can get a free translation of an uploaded image of a document. You can view questions or ask questions and get in touch with other researchers. Some other interesting sites for more advanced researchers, if you are searching for people who may have been noted in a business directory, Genealogy Indexer now has many business directories that you can look through, as well as historical Jewish press made by the National Library of Israel. Is a great website that has text searchable Jewish newspapers in a wide variety of languages. So if you want to make a search for the town name and see when and where that town name may have come up in a newspaper, or possibly even a relative's name in a newspaper, that's a great website. To answer briefly the question that I saw popped up in the chat, we're not sending the slides themselves out, but we will have sent out and will send out again a reference sheet with all of the websites mentioned, so that you have that in a more handy format. And you can see also in the chat before we end the presentation, if you click on those three little dots in the chat box where you would write a chat, you can choose to save the text. So there are a few ways for you to keep a hold of all of the sites that I've mentioned. And keep in mind also here is at the bottom, gi@cjh.org is my email in the division, the genealogy division of Center for Jewish History. So please feel free to send an email if you have more questions. Don't think of this as the final, the final minute, and then you lose your chance. If you had a question on our website, also we have printable and online research guides on a variety of topics. The second Friday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern on Facebook, on the page Center for Jewish History, we do a short live video called Genealogy Coffee Break on a variety of topics, and invite people to chime in with questions. And starting soon, later this week, actually, we're offering a paid Jewish genealogy research class called All in the Mishpucha, where you can take 10 sessions to really get a deeper understanding of Jewish genealogy if you want to go more in depth. And that class series also will be recorded. So if you sign up, you can participate live, or you can watch the recordings. Okay, so let me start addressing some of the questions in the chat. I'll keep this final slide up if people want to take a picture or copy down any of that information. So someone asks in the chat, where can you search Immigrant Aid Society group records? Great question, thank you. So also on this same page, the homepage of CJH Genealogy, under resources, right under the synagogue map, there is a link for YIVO Landsmannschaft collection. YIVO Archives is part of our Center for Jewish History building, and they have this alphabetical list of the Landsmannschaften. So you could put in, make a Control F search, and if you're looking for Chenstochov, for example, here's the United Chenstochover Relief Committee. That RG number is the call number. And eventually, we hope to have all of these collections digitized. But in the meantime, you can, for a small processing fee, request digitization, or you could make an appointment to come in person to see these collections here at Center for Jewish History. These are really only a drop in the bucket of how many immigrant aid societies existed, but at least it can give you a feeling of, even if you don't find that those records relevant exactly to your family history, it can give you an idea of the types of administrative records and community events and services that these kind of societies offered. Benefits for widows and planning for burial fees, all kinds of social services that people needed, especially before the era of Social Security. So that's one place. If we don't have the records, then I would recommend just search for the website by OCLC called Archive Grid. And this functions like a huge catalog for archive collections that could be anywhere in the world and in any participating institution. So you could search Archive Grid by the name of the town or collection on you know, if the records exist but in another institution. So that's a great place to start. Any other questions? I have my eye on the chat, or anyone can unmute. Or any stories. I also love to hear stories. If anything I mentioned today resonates with you, if you have a grandmother or family member who tricked everyone lying about their age, or confused everyone with different documents with different ages, I love to hear those stories, or other interesting points to share. And if not, I will end the screen share and make sure, again, if you want to click to save the chat. Okay, I see, right, someone chimed in, right. It can be tricky with you know, our immigrant ancestors who were coming from the Hebrew calendar to the Western calendar. Maybe they didn't know exactly their birth date in the Western calendar, or they didn't really care. So even unintentionally, there can be some funny stories about birth years. But yeah, as long as it ended up on the tombstone the correct year, that doesn't confuse the descendant researchers too much. So I hope this was a good experience and informative and inspiring to all of you. Remember that you're free to reach out either to me at Center for Jewish History or to my colleagues at Brooklyn Public Library, especially if you want to donate any material relevant to Brooklyn Jewish history, or to do an oral history contribution. So it's been really fun to share my work with you today, and I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Ariane.
Oops.
And I'll put in the meantime, just as a reminder, my email gi@cgh.org if you have any questions that you think of after we go.
Thank you so much, JD, for this very interesting presentation. Our last introductory workshop is scheduled for April 4. Again, please send all your questions that were answered today to JD at gi@cgh.org. Please reach out to me if you'd like to participate to our Brooklyn Jewish History Project and being interviewed and or give some documents to enrich our collection. You will find all the information that were given today by JD and the references on the links in the attached document that was sent to you with the link of the workshop, as well as the link for the Jewish History Project, the Brooklyn Jewish History Project. And I will send you also the YouTube link of today's program once it's online. Thank you so much again for your participation. Thank you, JD. Have a great week and stay healthy.
Stay healthy,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.